Here is the beginning of our adventure. You and I, we're a story. We turn time around, it's our time.
Episode 3, The Trans Tapes.
Hello and welcome back. This is the third and final part of Adventures in Time and Gender. In episode 1, we went in search of ancient trans people and discovered how tricky language can be.
And in episode 2, we started out looking at the history of labels, and that led us to explore categorization and diagnosis.
And that was tricky too, wasn't it? There's this ongoing tension between diagnosis and self-ID. Think back to the warrior of episode 1, just living her life, rejecting our labels. She said that we know trans people have always existed. She said that people are people, so who do we need to prove it to anyway, and why? It's like, as trans people, we're always having to prove something to someone.
So, what do you fancy this week? We could talk to some of the doctors who are continuing Harry Benjamin's work if you like. I thought we could go back to 1966 when Charing Cross Gender Identity Clinic was opened.
Oh, no thanks, Suitcase.
Yeah?
I've already got something planned, actually. I want to hear what trans people have to say. I'm going to play some clips of interviews that I've made with trans people who are alive. Older trans people. Well, older than me. Not older than you, probably. Oh, yes. And remember last time we ended by talking about possibility models? Something that we only dreamed of and then find out can actually happen. Well, my first interview is with someone who remembers the effect that hearing about Christine Jorgensen had on her back in 1952. Okay, great. And starting again. 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, that looks fine. So we're 5 seconds in. You've read the information sheet?
I have.
And you know that you can talk about whatever you want, and anything you don't want to talk about, that's absolutely fine.
The year was 1952, and Christine Jorgensen, who was one of the first transgender women, back in those days she was called a transsexual woman, she had her operation. And the news of this was, well, the headlines were sort of inches deep, you know. It was the first time, there were other people before her, but they'd flown under the radar to a large extent. Christine Jorgensen was the first one where it was really sort of, it broke the headlines. And I remember my father reading this story out to my mum. I can remember it to this day, and it's sort of 67 years later. I was lying on the floor reading a comic, like children do, and my father read this story out. My ears were sort of pricking up and burning, because by this time I was identifying internally as a girl. But I was also a little bit odd about it. And then my father, at the end of this story, turned to Mum and said, "Perverts like that should be locked away in the loony bin and the key thrown away." And initially all the hopes there was somebody else out there like me were dashed. And that was my first real feeling of shame, of who I was, of how I identified.
And can I ask as well, sorry to interrupt, but can I ask, did you have any other experiences, or did you have a word in your head for what you were?
No, there was no word.
Right.
I just knew that I wasn't a boy and identified more with girls. I knew that there were people in the world who'd started off as boys and then actually become women because of the case of Christine Jorgensen. Christine Jorgensen was the only one I knew about.
Wow, that really shows how powerful a possibility model can be.
Yeah, but she already felt differently. She knew she wasn't a boy, but didn't have any words to describe that. So seeing Christine Jorgensen was massive for her, but didn't change who she was. You know what I mean?
It's making me think about how some people worry that if you so much as talk about gender identity, then someone will be transed.
Don't you mean transgendered?
Transgenderified!
Transgenderification! I bet even then in the 1950s people were saying, but they were perfectly normal until they saw that Christine Jorgensen in the paper.
It is a sad story too, though, isn't it?
Yeah. I've got another clip here of someone else who had complicated feelings around a possibility model.
And then there was another key moment when there was a documentary on the television, and I've heard other, particularly trans men, talk about it. It was called, I think, Make Me a Man. And that was another one of those light bulb moments of at least feeling there are other people out there who are struggling with something that feels very similar to myself. But it wasn't just pure relief. It was also linked with shock, that the phase would end if I accepted that it's not just a phase. This is for real. This is my life. I'm just one of those freaks on Kilroy Silk's morning interviews. That I possibly could do something, but it would involve surgery and hormones. And it all felt really terrible.
There have been a few positive representations, but for the most part, when you think about how trans people are portrayed on TV, I'm not surprised that the prospect of being trans felt terrifying to them.
To be honest, I'm surprised sometimes that anyone is trans. I mean, take these interviews. It doesn't sound like something a person would particularly want to be.
Well, no, but these are two people talking about the very difficult time that they had before they came out. You know, it's obviously not all bleak. Trans people are amazing.
You humans find ways of being yourselves against the odds. Reminds me of Magnus.
That's Magnus Hirschfeld, Suitcase's favourite sexologist, for any listeners just tuning in.
Thank you. Yes, Magnus Hirschfeld chronicled all sorts of violence committed against gay men and lesbians, you know, from Oscar Wilde's trial to the stories he heard from his own patients. And I've sometimes thought, wouldn't that have put people off?
What? Put them off being gay?
Well, yes. Listen, you have to remember that I am a piece of luggage. I don't have a sexuality or a gender.
All right, so let's just get this straight. You can't put people off being gay or trans any more than you can make them become gay or trans. But you can make somebody very miserable by not letting them be themselves. I've got some clips to play you that I think will illustrate this perfectly. But just to warn you, there are some mentions of offensive words that have been used against LGBTIQ+ people.
Well, from about 4 years old, I had this feeling that I ought to have been, a bit more like my sister, because I just couldn't get it into my head that I had to be a boy and not a girl. And being a Catholic, I used to, in my prayers each night, pray to God that I'd wake up in the morning and my body would be a lot more like my sister's. And my parents would simply say, "Oh, we had a girl and not a boy," and I'd be able to be myself. I was always reasonably open about it, and then I got caught going to school wearing some of my mum's clothes because I was practicing to be the person I knew I'd grow up to be. Well, my school were cross, and my parents were even crosser, and because it was a church school, the church was very cross. I got sent to see the school psychologist, who, bear in mind, this was in 1952 when I was 6 years old, who was amazingly advanced and said to my parents, "Don't worry, it's a child exploring their own identity." Can you believe that? That's just amazing. But my parents just told me no, it was wicked and I mustn't do it. So of course I hid it. But it didn't stop me from being myself when nobody was around, though. And I remember as a youngster, my parents had central heating put into our house, and the builders had left a whole lot of hemp, and I made it into a wig. And I used to hide it under the floor in the loft where my model railway was.
When I was 10, 11, and we had a Victorian Day at school, where all the kids dress up as Victorian children and went in, there was absolutely no way I would have been going in some frilly dress or whatever. So I went in as like a street urchin lad, just like all the other boys did, really. And my dad wouldn't have anything to do with those decisions, actually. But my mum was fine about that, actually. Didn't bat an eyelid, really, and neither did anyone at school back then. But for me, it was like, I remember that day at school being just fantastic because I was just one of the boys. And the next day, I felt really, really gutted because I had to go back again in a blinking skirt.
Because you feel shame. There's something inside you that you want to do, that you need to do, but you know it's going to hurt people around you. And you also, you've got to overcome that shame because this was still years before even the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality, which happened in 1967. So it was years before that even happened. So, you struggle on and try to make what you can of your life. And so, like I say, I was at university, and to make a little bit more money, I used to work at a pub. Quite a big pub. It was a great place to work. I'd been there for about 4, 5, 6 months. And they used to have what was called a mother and pram race for charity. Except it wasn't a mother and baby, it was people in the pub. It was generally the males. One would dress up as a woman, and the other would sort of dress up as a baby and go in a pram. And so I said to a friend of mine, do you want to go in for it? And he said, why not? But I'm not going as a woman.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, it made me feel great, because for the first time I could actually present as a girl. Because to me, that gave me the opportunity to say, oh, I was going to go as a baby, but okay, if that's the only way you'll go in for it, then I'll be the woman. And of course, all the girls in the pub, the waitresses, the bar staff, etc., they thought it was a great idea. So they were there, they supplied the clothes, they did all my makeup, shoes, the lot. And funnily enough, we came first, which was great. I'd got changed at the pub. It was quite a big pub, very modern one. And I got back, went to get changed, and the landlady had hid my clothes. The landlady, she'd hidden my clothes.
Hidden them? Okay.
Because she said, you're going to do the night shift, the evening shift, as you are. So I'd spend basically the whole day as a woman. It was in an atmosphere where people thought it was fun. It was raising money for charity and everything else. And so in the evening, she said, right, you can keep on going round occasionally, all the customers, with your buckets, get more donations, which was fine. I was able to sit on the guys' knees and sort of flirt with them and everything else like this. And they were fine with it. So it was a great, liberating experience for me. Then, of course, she gave me my clothes back, and back to drab, back to prison. That sort of experience had shown me that it was possible.
Can I ask, what labels and words were going through your head when you were questioning who you were?
Well, back in the day, it was homosexual, or homo, or queer, or poofter, or faggot. And I don't think gay might have just been about entering the lexicon. But like I say, most people referred to gay people with the insulting phrases. So you sort of then start identifying yourself with those phrases. And you're trying to work out in your head where you fit into this world, which is very, very difficult. So it was a very, very, very confusing time.
The hemp wig hidden under the train set.
I know, right? Did you hear what she was saying about words and labels?
Yes, that struck me when she said that you start identifying yourself with the insults.
See, I hadn't thought of that. That we might not have our own words to describe ourselves, but the people who don't like us certainly do.
Did you get any more interviews about labels and words?
Yeah, I'll play you some. Was being trans the first sort of identity thing that you had? Because I know a lot of people sort of think, you know, maybe I'm lesbian, maybe I'm this, and then sort of come to the conclusion of being trans. Did you just go, this is it?
Well, you know, the first thing would have been I'm a boy. So the minute I realised the word like trans existed, then that would have been me first. When I transitioned, the word transgender was starting to be used, but it wasn't common. Most people probably would refer to themselves as transsexual. So I know that word is now totally out of fashion, but actually, it's the word that I discovered first. And that reason in itself, just because that was the word that I kind of, you know, grew up with, to me, weirdly feels more comfortable than transgender. So with the word transgender, I just don't identify at all.
Well, before I transitioned, I saw myself as a cross-dresser or a transvestite because back in those days, in the 70s and the 80s, transvestite was quite widely used, and it's only more recently that it seems to have become more stigmatized, which I think in a way is a pity because, well, it may well be linked to the way it's described in the diagnostic manuals as fetishistic transvestitism, which I don't think I have, and I suppose, well, I always held people who transitioned in a bit of awe because I couldn't do that.
When I first realised I was trans, I felt like I had to really conform to masculinity and conform to this like desire to be like a cis man. And as I've sort of gone through, well, one of the main things is spending time with other trans people, and especially trans masculine, non-binary or assigned female at birth people. I don't know what, there's no easy encompassing language to get to what I'm meaning, but spending time with other people like me basically kind of helped me realise that I don't have a desire to be like a cis man. My identity is actually just not female, and I assume not female meant therefore male. And it's only kind of, I mean, non-binary as a term wasn't around when I realised I was trans. It didn't exist. In fact, when I first realised I was trans was only because I finally realised there could be trans men. I'd only ever heard of trans women, and like never in a good way.
Cool. So, how would you describe your gender?
Trans female, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not all that up on the terminology or anything. I mean, so that's how I feel to myself. And I know people say, some people sort of say like I'm a woman with a gender history, or I'm a trans woman, or I am a trans female, or whatever. But I am any kind of that, really, anything that's sort of not male.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably like non-binary is the easiest way for me to shorthand communicate myself to people. Because for some reason, I've never been comfortable with agender as a label, for the same reason that I'm not comfortable with atheist. It feels like I'm taking a stance against this thing, and I'd rather call myself a non-theist. I like genderless because it's just like saying, oh, there's that thing and I haven't got it.
I actually I struggle with this really. Probably more genderqueer. But I'm not quite sure about the queer bit, for me personally, in my life. But gender is a bit of a problem for me in terms of I don't quite know what that might mean. So if I say agender, or I say gender variant, or even, that's a bit... But genderqueer probably gives me a bit of landscape to move around in, and not have to define so narrowly, you know? And also, can I just say, also because I have a partner who's female, who identified, when we got together, identified more as a lesbian. And that relationship, you're often defined by the other, aren't you? So, in a way, my partner has, I think, struggled with the idea of going, what does this relationship mean then? And what does it mean for you to say that you're genderqueer and to have these pronouns? What does it mean about who I'm in a partnership with? And I thought, that's actually quite an interesting question. I'm just me, but these meanings alter the meaning of who I am for somebody else. And then they're not sure about what I might mean about who I am. And I just think this sort of, it's quite interesting about, well, who are we then? What does that mean? Anyway, so there we go.
You said that you transitioned quite late. Did you... when did you first sort of realise that you weren't cis?
Well, I think the word cis was probably one of the last words I learned. So if you ask that question, it might have only been about 10 years ago. But I know what you're asking, I think. I remember it would now be about 19 years ago, first starting to Google around gender identity, and there really wasn't that much on the web. But I came across a website which spoke about female-bodied, male-identified individuals. And for the first time in my life, I felt I'd found language which helped me understand myself. And all the years before that, the only way I could think about this was using words like feeling weird, not fitting in, being odd.
And I just think we're in a day and age where I'd like there to not be labels. I know we need words to describe things, but, I think today we're too quick to be like, right, you need to be in that box, you need to be in that box, just so everyone feels happy because we're all in lined up little boxes. But I just don't like boxes because I think it gives people the power to discriminate,
Crikey, some people wanting labels, some people not wanting them.
It's almost as though trans people are individuals, Suitcase?
You know what I mean.
I'm going to quote C.N. Lester here from their book, Trans Like Me. Listening taught me that the labels that confined me could liberate others, that the right answer for one person could become the wrong answer for another, and that all we could do was lend support in our shared individuality.
Wow.
It's brilliant, right? Okay, next, I'm going to play you some interviews about diagnosis and medical intervention.
Can I just say, though, that I really like the way you've taken charge of this episode. You've come into your own, narrator.
Well, thank you very much. I think I just feel more comfortable in my own time, you know? And these are my people. I mean, even though some of them are much older than me. And it's funny because when we spoke to Harry Benjamin and Alfred Kinsey, they seemed like people from long, long ago to me, and then I'm chatting to these trans people and realise there's an overlap, you know? I mean, the work that Benjamin was doing is still impacting on lives nowadays. Remember when we met them in that pub and Harry Benjamin was talking about his scale?
Yes, and the profiteroles, but yes, I remember.
Of course, the profiteroles. But remember how I asked him if he ever thought that people just said what they thought he needed to hear in order to diagnose them? Well, listen to this. But first, a content note for people's stories about psychiatric treatments and attempted suicide.
Yeah, so obviously I'm dealing with the whole medical thing. That's another side of it. I kind of went in on day one and that was it. Before you get your first consultation, there was kind of an open day where you're invited to go to the clinic and meet people. They do a talk on how lovely it all is. And, you know, I went in not really feeling it. It was like, you know, I know you're not going to treat me properly. And by lunchtime, I kind of thought, you know, okay, if I'm going to get what I want here, I've got to jump through their hoops. And I went in with the attitude that I was going to fight it in any system. And by lunchtime, I changed my mind. And I thought, no, you know, it's just like, okay, no, just give me the drugs. Let's just do it. And I'll conform to your binary narratives or whatever, and I'll say all the right things as long as you treat me, because people are presenting in a way that they're creating an expectation and they're feeding that expectation, and it's just some sort of, a feedback loop.
I know if someone's trans enough if they say, I'm trans, because no one signs up for this shit willy-nilly, you know? If you go, I'm trans, I'm not sure if I want to take hormones, that's a totally different thing. But whether or not you're trans enough is entirely yours. I don't get to own that. No one gets to own that. And no one goes, you know what I really love? A bit of gender dysphoria. That's the best fucking thing. And nobody thinks they have gender dysphoria and then go, oh no, hold on, it turned out to be cramps. There's no false thing here. Where your gender identity falls can vary. But at the point you question whether you're cis, you're probably not fucking cis, you know? Because no cis person is sitting there wondering, I wonder if I'm cis or not. Because it's so ingrained in us to be that way. It may be that somebody goes, oh, okay, maybe I'm non-binary. Actually, it's easier for me to live as cis. I'm not bothered. That isn't the same thing, you know, so...
I finally plucked up the courage to actually go and talk to my GP about it. And he referred me immediately to the local psychiatric institute, the local hospital. And he was an old guy I saw. He was, back in the day, the actual waiting lists were nowhere near as what they were like today. I saw the psychiatrist within about a month. Like I say, he was an old guy. He'd been brought up in a different era. And the first thing he offered me was electroconvulsive shock therapy. Now, I'd read about this, and I realised it didn't do anything and it wasn't for me, so I politely refused. And the next thing he offered me was male hormones, because he would make a man of me. And that, to me, was the furthest point that I ever wanted to approach. I'd had enough of being this pseudo-man. I just couldn't bear this. I tried to commit suicide to get away from it. Why would I want to even go there? So he said, well, think about it. And about the same time, again, there was this series of events that seemed to conspire to actually help me, because a new gender identity clinic had opened up. I'd heard about it, and so I said, well, there might be salvation there. So I asked him whether he could refer me through to this gender identity clinic, and I think he was just glad to get rid of me. So he referred me on, and so I got an appointment at this gender identity clinic, and again, it was nothing like it was today, because I got an appointment within about 6 weeks. I went to see them. I was in there for a full day assessment, and they asked me to come back the following week. They wanted to sort of run all the through all the tests, the results of all the tests. They just said, you're on the transsexual scale. Would you like to start hormones?
So, what were the tests? What tests did you have to go through?
Oh, there were Rorschach psychological tests, sort of mind play test scenarios. It just went on and on and on.
And what were you feeling during that time?
I was excited. Because I was, to me, identified as a woman. So why wouldn't I pass these tests? So I didn't fear them. You had to give all your history as well. Anyway, I went back a few weeks later and they said, you identify on the transsexual scale, would you like to start the hormone therapy? Wow, yes. I mean, it was that easy. Within sort of 2 months, I was diagnosed and being offered treatment. So yes, I was overjoyed. So this was sort of slowly happening.
Because once I had made that decision, then it was like, right, I've got to do this as quick as I can, because I'm 42. I haven't got any time to be hanging about. I realised that it was going to be very difficult, because at that stage you had to, as an adult in that, you had to be referred to the adult mental health services first, and they were the gatekeepers to get you in the gender clinic and that. So my GP, the first GP I went to, I told them about this and what I wanted to do, and they were like, well, you can't do that on the NHS, we don't do cosmetic surgery. And once I became aware that's who I was and that's what I wanted to do, I started reaching out to find information and community online. So I was then able to sort of go, okay, there's this GP, private GP, who I can, if I can get £250 together, I can get started on hormones. So I did that. And because the effects of tea come really quickly as well, or well, they did for me, my voice started changing within a couple of weeks. And, you know, it changed really, really quickly. And that was really, really wonderful for me. That whole thing, I was like every other trans person. And I started doing those YouTube videos of, here's my squeaky voice, week 1, week 2.
I really, within 2 days of starting estrogen, it's like, I'll try to describe it. It's like some horrible noise in my head had been turned off, like some horrible background. It's like when you're sitting in somewhere, right? And there's like a really loud radio or something, and it's been there forever, or like a fly buzzing in a room or something. You know, you're kind of aware of it subconsciously, and suddenly you become really aware of it, and then suddenly it's really pissing you off, and you have to stop it. It's like it was there, and then it was gone.
Okay, so a bit of a change of tack, because I remember you talking about this. I'd like to come back to it. You said you identify as a bear now?
Yes.
When did that word come into your life?
I think when because I got quite hairy early on, I described starting testosterone as pulling on my hairy leggings, because it just was literally like it started from my ankles, not from my feet. Like, weirdly, I have completely hairless feet, but from my ankles. And I just watched this wave of hair go up my body. And then it got to my chin and like kind of stopped for a long time, or, you know, longer than I wanted it to take. Do you know what I mean? You know, the beard weight, it's just hell. It was just hell. And I'm sat here with a full beard. So I do realise that my moustache took so long to come in. But I think, so at that point, I mean, I had this lush, full head of hair and this hairy chest. And I think I needed a word for because I'm overweight and I've always been overweight, and I wanted something that just acknowledged that it was okay. And so I fell into the kind of cult category. Only really, I don't know, because I couldn't really claim it because I was in a relationship with a woman. And it's only since being on testosterone that I've really had like this attraction to men.
So, aside from, the physical effects, how do you feel about your kind of relationship with estrogen in terms of how you feel in your body?
Well, my experience with starting to take it was like, imagine I had to hold my bum above my chair using all the strength of my arms when I felt like I'd just spent my entire life like that. And then suddenly I got to sit down for the first time and to kind of sit in myself, which is why I spent the first month just crying all the time, which I mean, partly it's just hormone, emotional stuff, but also
being present.
And relief and grief.
When I was transitioning, not very many people knew about it, because it was, like I was saying, there was only 8 or 9 operations per annum for the whole of the UK. There was a tiny number of people actually going through it. And therefore, it didn't get the attention that it gets these days. Every day in the papers there's stories about transgender people. Back then, it was virtually unheard of. Because a lot of trans people, well, they kept themselves well below the parapet. Because they knew that they would be pilloried. And so they didn't volunteer themselves. And so there wasn't the stories, and therefore also there wasn't the public perception. I remember when I first started working in London, there was this article in The Sun about a transgender woman. I remember sitting there, I was really frightened because they had this sort of box thing inserted into the story, 10 ways to recognise a transgender woman.
I'd been wearing a binder for years, one that fastened underneath my left arm with this very thick Velcro patch, which I was proper uncomfortable with. I'm fearful also that people would touch it. So I always had my left arm kind of clamped down, and I hated hugs. I didn't want anyone to touch that seam. So having that off allowed me to breathe in a very, very different way. And that allowed me to connect with others. So after that, I felt able to be touched and to be hugged and able to consider having a relationship and sexual relations, which before was an absolute taboo. And that is also then what happened. So for me, all of that was a very liberating experience. But, at huge cost.
But that huge cost is mostly from the outside, from other people, from the newspaper with its 10 ways to spot a trans woman. I read something like that online just the other day. It's 2020. That's what I don't get. A few years ago, we had this thing called the transgender tipping point. Remember that? But what have we tipped into? It feels like we've gone back in time. Well, not even that. Back in time, as I found out, doesn't necessarily mean worse for us. But it's like we've taken 1 step forwards and 2 steps back. Thinking about Hirschfeld and the Institute, we were so close. But it feels like we're on a constant cycle of nearly getting there, nearly getting to where things are all right for us, and then back we go again. I mean, look, if we try to just get on with our lives, we're accused of reinforcing stereotypes. They say all the young people are changing their bodies because they've got internalised homophobia, ignoring the fact that loads of us are trans as well as queer. And we say, well, we might not want to change our bodies. And that's our choice. We're just asking that people call us by the name and the pronoun that we are. And then they say, we won't do that unless you change your body. And maybe not even then, because we don't believe that you can change sex and don't even think about going to the toilet unless you don't look trans. And it's like, it feels impossible to...
Hey. Are you okay, kid?
I'm just exhausted. I feel worn out. All the stories, the historical ones, and the ones that I've recorded, whatever names people found for themselves, it's just people trying to live their lives. It's people trying to be themselves in a world that just...
Always has been, always will be. Did you ever wonder why I like you lot so much?
You lot as in humans.
No, you lot as in the trans and non-binary and gendery whatnots.
Okay, Suitcase, tell me, why do you like us so much?
Because you play with time. If you ask a trans person, if you could go back in time, what would you say to yourself as a child? They don't miss a beat because they've had that conversation back and forth so many times. They've imagined their future selves so hard that they can see them just ahead. And I hear what they're saying. It echoes through time. And it's always simply, you're all right. And that resilience that you have, that you think you don't have, but that you sometimes need a dashing piece of luggage to point out to you that you do totally have it, you know? That, remember how I said the responsibility of time travel was to make the times you're living in better? To send messages of hope out so that they might reach people from the future who need them. The trans people you interviewed, they left messages of hope in those recordings. I know they did. I know that they did because they wanted to say to you recording them, to anyone listening, they wanted to say, you're all right.
Right. Thanks, Suitcase.
I mean, you know, I see nature and life as being diverse in gender and sex. It is. It's out there within animals, within plants, within the rest of life. So why are we any different? And I would be, if I was a parent in that, I would be talking to kids, obviously in age-appropriate ways in that. That's just how life is, you know? And we're all different. And because I think that's not just important for trans and gender diverse people, but when you think of all the hang-ups that cisgender girls and boys have about their bodies, and that because of what they see to be idolized, particularly genitals and things, you know, it's so important that we do stress how everyone is equally valid. It doesn't matter. And all of our bits are very different, you know? So I feel really, really privileged now that I am trans. I find that it's a beautiful thing to have had the opportunity to experience living in different genders and experience sort of like that world through those different lenses, very different lenses. It's a real privilege, actually, and a strength. And that brings me sort of back to that first exploration on the internet for finding who I was. And, you know, back to those cultures that are embracing of different genders. That's just normal. Where gender diverse people were actually more honoured in Indigenous societies, where we were seen to have a special place in those societies because of our experience. And that feels really, really spiritual and very important to me now as well. It's just being alive. It's not actually anything more than that. I'm just being alive and true to me, and I want that for other people as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I really understand what you mean. I think being trans does give you this knowledge into the fact that gender roles are really Western society created.
Absolutely. It's colonialism. It's colonialism of people's bodies, isn't it?
I was thinking when I get old, I want to retire back home to the country I grew up in. But if I'm going to get married with my partner, obviously we're not going to be acknowledged. We'll not have this recognition. So I'm quite worried about that. And yeah, we'll still keep on fighting.
I'd like to think, and I'm quite similar to you, I'm quite optimistic about things. I like to think that one day we will get there. Everybody.
We're going to get there. It might be slowly, but surely. We're going to get there. And yeah, we just have to be strong together.
Exactly.
We just have to be strong together.
Really, it's a political moment we need. A political zeitgeist where we just go on the street, you know? Just go on the bloody street. That's what Lesbian Strength was about, you know? People sat down in Piccadilly, wouldn't move. It was great. No car could get past. They sat down, it was like, there was I, like one of the stewards. I was going, you can't sit down. Well, we're not moving, that's it. We're not moving. We don't agree with lesbians being treated like shit, and we're not moving. But you have to move. But then I thought, actually, you don't have to move. This is our society. That's your street. Sit on it. Sit on your street. So we went, all right then, let's all sit down. And the whole of central London was completely stuffed with lesbians. I have to say, it was a vision. You know what I mean? Just lesbians everywhere, just stopping the whole traffic. And that's what we need to do. I keep saying it. I think we all need to go on the streets, stuff the lot of them. Anyway, look, that might be my ending shot.
I think that finish is perfect. And can I say what a relief it is to hear that from you? Especially I am so tired of people who are older than me telling me to quieten down.
Oh, never quieten down. Be louder. Be loud. Fuck quiet. Quiet you die with. When you're dead, you're quiet, right? Till then, stay loud.
I'd like to say a massive thank you to all the people who allowed me to interview them and who shared their stories.
Yes, thank you to all the contributors. So how did we do? Did we prove that trans people have always existed?
Turns out we didn't need to.
Who did we think we needed to prove it to, and why?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think at the start of this, I'd hoped that we'd find these historical figures and be able to kind of lay them on the table like a winning hand in a game of cards and be like, there, you can't deny our existence, or, I don't know, say that trans people were invented on the internet in 2015 because we have always been here throughout time. But people have done that before.
Magnus Hirschfeld did just that with his collection of artifacts, with the stories from his patients.
Exactly. It was all there, and then it was burned.
Well, not all. Some things were saved. And of course, his death mask and papers that I told you about were found years later inside me. Thank goodness. I dread to think what would have happened if I wasn't rescued from the rubbish chute.
What rubbish chute, Suitcase?
Well, they were clearing out Magnus's lover's flat in Vancouver after he died. Years later, they just put me out with the rubbish.
Suitcase? That's terrible.
Well, nobody knew. They didn't know we'd been forgotten. No one cared. Our warrior asked us back in episode 1, why have people in the West chosen to erase us? Why do you think?
Wanting to control people? I mean, if you look around the world, when the people in charge want to tighten controls on a population, one of the first things that seems to go is LGBTIQ+ rights, right? British colonialism is an example of that happening. Rich and nuanced experiences of gender wiped out and replaced with the bloody binary. But you can also see it happening in oppressive regimes today, too. And then we never get a chance to establish ourselves because we're assumed to have not been around in all of history. As if. Suitcase, I can't stop thinking about you and Magnus Hirschfeld's death mask on a rubbish heap. Queer history is so precious and precarious. We need to find the stories from other cultures too, because we have even less documentation of queer and trans people of colour. We need to go back in time, finding more people like ourselves in the stories, but we also need to think about the future. We need to tell our own stories in our own words for future time travellers.
It sounds like my work here is done, narrator.
Thank you, Suitcase.
No, thank you. I mean it. I can't wait to see what you're going to do next.
Well, you don't have to wait, though.
Oh no, I'm going to take it easy for a while. Maybe I'll go back and I'll hang out with Ulrichs in his corncockles. I haven't decided yet. But you, however, should keep exploring.
But how am I going to
Look, it's not hard. And you can start by going to the website of this very podcast, adventuresintimeandgender.org. And there are some alternative wormholes to travel through where you can find out more about some of the people and themes that we've looked at. And you can also set off on further adventures exploring non-Western trans history. See where it takes you. Remember, this is your history. Keep asking questions. This is your time.
Goodbye, Suitcase.
Goodbye, narrator. Take care.
And goodbye, and a big, big thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in and for joining us on our journey through time, gender, and IKEA.
We turn time around, it's our time.
Adventures in Time and Gender was developed with trans and non-binary young people, written by Jason Barker with additional dialogue by the cast and crew, directed by Krishna Istha, sound by Joe Jackson, music and lyrics by The Mollusk Dimension. In episode 3 of Adventures in Time and Gender, Sam Creera was the narrator and Emma Frankland was the Suitcase. In the summer of 2019, trans and non-binary young people involved in this project interviewed older trans and non-binary people in the community. The interviews in this episode are anonymized transcriptions and the recordings have been reperformed by Janae Lelacheux, Felix Mufti Wright, Shay Patton Walker, Ugla Stefania Christianadotter Jonsdotter, Fox Fisher, Tink Flaherty, Aaliyah Grace, Katayun Jalilipur, Emrys Kalyan, and Kumari Romeo. The Foley mixer was Sophia Hardman. The Foley artist was Ollie Ferris. The re-recording mixer was Candela Palencia. Backing vocals and harmony by Wild. This podcast is funded by the Wellcome Trust and was made in collaboration with the Rethinking Sexology team at the University of Exeter and Gendered Intelligence. For further adventures and more wormholes to explore, please visit adventuresintimeandgender.org or join the conversation on #TransThroughTime.